In Brazil, the death toll after heavy rains in the northern coast of Sao Paulo rose to 64. Authorities registered 4,000 displaced persons. In Italy, over 60 people died and 80 others were rescued following the shipwreck of a vessel off the coast of Calabria. And in Nigeria, electoral authorities continue counting the votes of Saturday's presidential and legislative elections. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. We do so in Peru. Citizens marched this Saturday in response to new calls for protest against the government of appointed President Dina Boluarte, whom they blame for at least 60 deaths caused by the repression of public forces. Demonstrators gathered at Campo de Marte de Lima, also known as Revolution Square, located in the district of Jesus Maria, to demand justice for those who died during their struggle for democracy. Some of the demonstrators carried in their hands the photographs of the deceased and black ribbons to honor them. These marches were repressed by members of the national police who were beating demonstrators and used tear gas against them. These actions carried out by public forces left a balance of at least 2 people wounded, a man and a woman, who ended up with significant injuries in their heads. Peru's government declared a 90-day health emergency in 59 districts on Friday in order to combat the outbreak of dengue. The latest report of the National Center for Epidemiology, Prevention and Disease Control of Peru stated that so far this year, 11,585 cases of dengue fever and 16 deaths have been detected in the country, 12 of them confirmed with the disease and 4 under investigation. So far, the regions most affected by the disease are Uyacali, Loreto and Madre de Dios, with more than 2,000 active cases. The Ministry of Health warned that if this outbreak persists without strengthening health interventions, there is a risk that death will increase and cases will spread to other regions and metropolitan Lima, a city of 10 million inhabitants. In Ecuador, the National Confederation of Farmers, Indigenous and Black organizations withdrew from the dialogue with Guillermo Lazo's government and demanded his resignation. The announcement was made by the president of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities, CONAI, Leonidas Issa, who said the decision was taken by the extended council of the group, which met on February 24th in Quito. Issa pointed out that for the moment they are evaluating how to respond to the lack of progress in what was agreed with the government after the strike in 2022, but new mobilizations are not ruled out. Representatives of the confederations of the peoples of the Quichua nationality, indigenous peoples of the Amazon and the Ecuadorian coast, will also participate in that decision. Brazilian authorities stepped up the fight against illegal mining on the Yanomami indigenous land, where many clandestine gold prospectors accused of unleashing a humanitarian crisis are refusing to leave the region. Teams from the Government Environmental Agency, IBAMA, and the Federal Highway Police were deployed to find and arrest those engaged in mining activity in the protected territories. The illegal miners have been accused by Yanomami leaders of physically abusing women as well as polluting their rivers with the mercury they use to separate the gold from the sediments. During these operations, they captured some miners who were in an improvised camp deep in the Amazon. The government of Luis Ignacio Lula Silva issued in January a state of health emergency decree for the territories where the Yanomami tribes live. In Brazil, the death toll from the rains that affected the northern coast of Sao Paulo and left more than 4,000 people displaced rose to 64. According to local media, the victims who have been identified are 19 men, 17 women, and 18 minors. Also, some 4,000 homes were partially or totally destroyed by the weather phenomena. Several rescue teams continue with the search and rescue of those still missing. Meanwhile, the government announced the creation of a state directorate to support the reconstruction works in São Sebastião. In Cuba, work continued on Saturday in the fight against forest fire in Holguín. Local authorities informed that the area affected by flames exceeds 1,300 hectares, and within the Mensura Piloto Natural Park are the most complex areas of the confrontation with the fire. 4 of the outbreaks were extinguished on Saturday and no deceased were reported, although the material damage is growing. Meteorologist Elier Pila announced that the extensive plume of smoke coming from the fire is visible in the satellite images and also shows other smaller active fires throughout the country. Holguin also had another fire of considerable proportion just 3 weeks ago in the mountainous areas of El Prado, finally controlled after burning for nearly 2 weeks. A powerful winter storm hit the west coast of the United States on Friday with flooding and frigid temperatures and impacted Southern California with dangerous raising river levels and triggering snowfall even in low-lying areas near Los Angeles. The National Weather Service said it was one of the strongest storms ever to hit southwest California, and despite the wind and rain volume decreasing, its impact remains significant. Major highways were closed as ice and snow made them impassable, including some stretches of Interstate 5, the main north-south highway connecting Mexico, California, the Pacific Northwest, and Canada. Elsewhere, snow and high winds downed power lines, knocking out power to more than 100,000 customers in California. Daniel Swain, a meteorologist at UCLA University, explained that a warming climate brought on by the uncontrolled burning of fossil fuels in the industrial era has changed the nature of winter precipitation in the area. A 6.1 magnitude earthquake shook the Hokkaido region of Japan on Saturday. The United States Geological Survey reported that the quake had a depth of 42.9 kilometers and the authorities did not issue a tsunami warning. The Japanese media did not immediately report any casualties or major property damage. According to official reports, the magnitude was felt at different scales in all parts of the island. They also detected seismic activity below level 5 in the city of Nemur and Shibetsu. Several earthquakes have struck Japan earlier. The strongest one happened on March 11, 2011 in the Honshu region with a magnitude of 9.1 on the Richter scale with a death toll of 1,475 deaths. Let's take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on TikTok, the account at teleSUR English, in which you'll be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and much more. All the stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back from the south. In Italy, at least 60 people died and 80 others were rescued after a vessel carrying migrants and refugees was shipwrecked off the coast of the Italian coastal town of Crotone in the southern region of Calabria. According to authorities, the vessel was carrying over 250 people from Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan and was unable to cope with the rough seas and crashed on the rocks of the coast. This new shipwreck takes place just a few days after the Italian parliament adopted new rules on the rescue of migrants promoted by the government. Giorgia Meloni, head of government, expressed in a press release her deep sorrow for the catastrophe and denounced the departure of vessels with a bad weather forecast. Pope Francis showed his condolences to the victims of the maritime incident in the waters of the Italian coast that took the lives of over 60 African migrants and thanked the rescue forces for their work.
It is with sorrow that I learned this morning of the shipwreck that took place on the Calabrian coast towards Crotone. 40 dead have already been recovered, among them many children. I pray for each one of them, for the people still missing and for the other migrants who survived. I thank the rescuers and the people willing to welcome them.
The head of the Catholic Church called for an immediate halt to the spiraling violence in Palestine at the hands of the Israeli occupation forces. Pope Francis called for an end to hatred and proposed that through dialogue, Palestine and Israel find the path to peace.
Painful news arrives from the Holy Land. Many people have been killed, including children. How can we stop this spiral of violence? Once again, I call for dialogue to take precedence over hatred and vengeance. I pray to God for the Palestinians and for the Israelis that they may find the path to peace and brotherhood with the help of the international community.
Thousands of people demonstrated on Saturday in Germany and the United Kingdom against the supply of arms to the government of Volodymyr Zelensky. According to police estimates, about 13,000 people attended a protest called the Rise for Peace in the center of Berlin, despite low temperatures calling for negotiations with Russia instead of arms deliveries to Ukraine. Elsewhere in Europe, in the United Kingdom, thousands of activists also took part in a protest in the center of London, calling on the UK government to stop sending arms to Ukraine. The United Kingdom and Germany are two of the largest arms suppliers to the Kiev regime after the United States, since Russia launched its special military operation aimed at denazifying and demilitarizing the neighboring country. Thousands of people also took to the streets of Lisbon on Saturday to ask the government of Antonio Costa for measures against the advance of inflation and the improvement of the working conditions of Portuguese public school workers. Among the union's demands are the low salaries, working conditions, and hiring criteria, which cause the loss of purchasing power of workers and the fact that young people are not interested in entering the sector. Union leaders explained this march was called to ask for the reevaluation of the teaching career and the rejection of the proposals so far made by Costa's executive, since he assured journalists that they are very insufficient. Israeli protesters rallied in Tel Aviv for an 8th straight week against controversial legal reforms being pushed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's ultra-right-wing government. The bill would restrict the Supreme Court's ability to reject laws due to the so-called annulment clause, which would allow Parliament to re-legislate regulations challenged by that body. It would also give the executive full control of the selection of judges, prevent the court from using a reasonableness test to judge legislation and government decisions, and allow ministers to appoint their own legal advisors. The bill is already having its negative effects on the business community, where according to a recent survey, some 20% of Israeli companies are considering taking their money out of the country or have already done so for fear of the consequences of the controversial reform. The Arab Interparliamentary Union expressed on Saturday its solidarity with Syria and its support for Damascus to regain its important Arab role as it was before the war. This position was expressed at the closing session of the 34th Conference of the Union held in Baghdad, the Iraqi capital, whose final declaration was quoted by the main Syrian media. It is necessary for Syria to resume its important role in the Arab, regional and international arenas, the statement said, adding that those gathered decided to form an Arab parliamentary delegation to confirm support for Damascus facing the aftermath of the earthquake. In his speech, Speaker of the Syrian People's Assembly, Hamoud Sabak, called on regional and international parliamentary federations and bodies and UN member states to exert pressure on Western countries to immediately lift their economic blockade. And now you can watch teleSUR English in 33 different African countries through StarSat. Dial 461 and enjoy our Latin American alternative broadcasts. We have more news coming up after a final short break, so don't go away. Welcome back from the South. Nigerian electoral authorities continue counting the votes of the presidential and legislative elections held on Saturday. Close to 90 million voters went to the polls to elect a new president and parliament, and what is considered the most open election since the nation adopted a democratic regime in 1999. Despite reported attacks on polling stations, the citizens were able to exercise their voting rights amid the deployment of security agents. Results of the elections are expected in 2 weeks, although the Electoral Commission promised to do its best to make them known as soon as possible. Hundreds of people take to the streets of the Tunisian capital on Saturday to denounce President Kais Saied, accusing him of racist comments and hate speech against sub-Saharan migrants. Earlier this week, Saied claimed that hordes of sub-Saharan migrants were causing crime and posing a demographic threat, sparking outrage and demonstrations demanding that the president apologize to sub-Saharan migrants. Tunisia is an African country that has been a key departure point for African migrants trying to reach Europe, what the United Nations says is the world's deadliest migratory route. More than 21,000 sub-Saharan Africans live in Tunisia, including those with student visas and other types of legal residence. In Cameroon on Saturday, at least 19 people were wounded after a series of explosions occurred during a marathon race. According to local media, the event took place in the city of Buea, in the west of the country, when the race of the Esperanza of the Mount of Cameroon was taking place, in which 529 athletes were participating. According to sources, the armed group called the Government Council of Ambazonia claimed responsibility for the explosions, alleging that they were directed against Cameroon's elite forces who were guarding the athletes. G20 finance ministers failed on Saturday to agree a joint statement on the global economy at talks in India. At the two-day meeting in Bengaluru, the G20 presidency noted that global growth remains sluggish and risks such as high inflation persist, the resurgence of pandemic, and the high debt of many poorer nations affected also because of the armed conflict in Ukraine. The presidency also noted that there were different assessments of the current Ukrainian crisis and the sanctions against the government of Vladimir Putin. For its part, India, host country of the G20, supported the Russian military operation in Ukraine, and it was announced that there will be no joint G20 settlement statement after China objected the use of the word war over the Ukraine topics.
Two countries had a reservation. So, with a footnote, certainly a communique can't go out. And therefore, it had to be a chair summary and an outcome document. Russia and China.
Nirmala Sitharaman and the Indian finance minister pointed out that the G20 must provide solutions to their problem of vulnerable countries.
The vulnerable countries are looking up to the G20 to find some solution, some kind of arrive at a position whereby their debt stress can be relieved. And many of them have been waiting for a very long time. So if we could arrive after so much of negotiation at a common position for a language on dealing with debt, I think the G20 is now standing up to meet the challenges of debt stress which many countries are facing, and this is a development.
Search and rescue efforts continue for 47 miners in the Chinese autonomous regions of Inner Mongolia after the collapse of a coal mine. So far, 6 miners have been reported dead. Rescue teams have opened 2 lifelines on the east and west sides of the collapsed mine on Saturday. The opening of the rescue channels have allowed more heavy equipment crews to come together to clear a large volume of landslides. So far, more than 50 sets of machinery are racing against time to remove debris, and more are on the way to help boost the rescue operation. The open pit mine collapsed at around 1 p.m. local time on Wednesday. So far, 6 people have been rescued from the rubble, 6 have been confirmed dead, and 47 others are still missing. We have come to the end of this news briefing. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.